We've covered a lot of ground in this module, and you've learned a lot of new terms, so we just want to review some of them with you before we move on to the next module. The first is a pair of terms that often go hand in hand, anemic domain models versus rich domain models. And remember, the anemic domain models, while often looked down upon from the perspective of DDD, they're perfectly fine for CRUD. These are models that look a lot more like a database schema than a class that has lots of methods and rich behavior in it. On the other side of that is a rich domain model, which is what we strive for in domain-driven design. And that's a model that really is focused on behavior, not just changing the values of properties.
Then we talked about entities, and entities tend to be one of the core pieces of our domain model. The key thing that distinguishes an entity from other types in our model is that it has some kind of identity that we can use to track it over time and to bring it in and out of persistence.
So we also talked about immutability, which is a really critical attribute for value objects. And immutability just means once an object has been instantiated, you can't change the value of any of its properties.
Another important term we learned about is the value object. A value object is an immutable class that is defined by the sum of the different properties that it has. We don't need an identity for a particular value object. In fact, a value object doesn't have any identity outside of the individual properties that it has. And in order for us to compare value objects, we simply compare all of its properties, and if they all match, then we can consider these two value objects to be equal.
We also learned about domain services, and these are interesting because domain services give you a place to put logic and behavior that you can't find a home for in the entities and value objects in your domain.
And the last term that we want to review is side effects. Side effects are changes that occur in your application or any kind of interaction with the outside world. Now, technically, any change to the state of the application can be considered a side effect. But generally, when we're talking about them, we're talking about things that changed other than the main intent of the operation that you're performing. For instance, it's often a good idea to keep operations that query information separate from those that change state. And if you follow this practice, then any queries that you make that result in changes to state would be said to have side effects.